Hello and welcome back to Skepticus. Today we're taking a look at a video from Testify that offers what it calls the real challenge to atheists. It suggests we should forget the old, tired arguments of Pascal's wager and instead consider a more sophisticated version, which it calls Butler's wager. The claim is that this wager is intellectually robust, evidence-based, and avoids all the pitfalls of its more famous predecessor. It presents itself as a reasonable, good faith challenge to skeptics. So let's take them up on that. We're going to break down this video piece by piece and see if Butler's wager is really the intellectual gauntlet it claims to be, or if it's just the same old bet in a tweed jacket. Let's start with the introduction, where the creator correctly points out the flaws in the original Pascal's wager.
Christian apologists, let's be real. Pascal's wager is famous, but it's got some major flaws. The pitch is simple. If God exists and you believe, you win heaven. If God exists and you don't believe, you lose big time. If God doesn't exist, you lose nothing in comparison to gaining eternity, so it's smart to bet on God. But here's the thing. Philosophers have pointed out that Pascal's wager feels like a gamble with no clear rules. Which God are you betting on? Can you even force belief? It doesn't believing just in case feel kind of shallow? Enter Joseph Butler.
Okay, so far so good. I'm in complete agreement. Pascal's wager is, frankly, terrible philosophy. The many gods objection is lethal to it. If you bet on the Christian God, but the real God is actually Zeus, you've lost just as badly. The idea that you can force yourself to have a genuine belief is psychologically naive. And the motive of believing purely out of self-interest seems to cheapen the very idea of faith itself. So I appreciate that the creator of this video acknowledges these well-established criticisms. It sets a tone that suggests we're going to have a more nuanced conversation. I'm genuinely curious to see how this Butler's wager is supposed to solve these problems. Let's see the pitch.
In 1736, this 18th century bishop and philosopher offered an upgrade to Pascal's wager. Instead of playing theological roulette, Butler says, take Christianity seriously, investigate it carefully with an open mind. Here's his reasoning. For probable proofs being added not only increase the evidence but multiply it. A mistake in rejecting Christianity could have far more serious consequences than a mistake in accepting it. In other words, Butler's wager isn't about forcing belief, it's about asking whether rejecting Christianity is the bigger risk.
And there it is, the core of the argument. At first glance, it sounds possibly more reasonable. It's not believe or burn, it's investigate with an open mind. But let's look at the framing. The entire premise still hinges on this one sentence. A mistake in rejecting Christianity could have far more serious consequences than a mistake in accepting it. Here's the problem. This isn't an upgrade to Pascal's wager. It's just Pascal's wager moved one step up the decision tree. The wager is no longer on belief itself, but on the investigation. But the motivation for the investigation is still rooted in the very same calculus of infinite reward versus infinite punishment. He's telling you to investigate with an open mind, but he's already placed a giant, terrifying thumb on one side of the scale. It's like saying, please conduct an open-minded and fair investigation into whether this bridge is safe to cross. But just so you know, if you decide that it's unsafe, a sniper will shoot you. Can you truly conduct a neutral investigation under those conditions? The wager is structured to bias the inquiry from the very beginning by smuggling in the assumption of hell or eternal separation from God as the bigger risk. Despite the slightly fancier clothing, it is still an appeal to fear, just dressed up as an appeal to reason. Now, he claims this approach fixes Pascal's key problem. Let's see how.
Let's dig in a little bit. Pascal's wager has some obvious issues, and Butler's wager fixes them. First, there's the many gods objection. Pascal assumes that you're betting on the Christian God, but critics argue there are countless other options. Zeus, Odin, Vishnu, Allah, you name it. What if you're wrong? Butler doesn't ask you to blindly gamble on a deity. Instead, he challenges you to start with Christianity. Why? Because it has uniquely strong evidence that sets it apart, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Second is the impossibility objection. Pascal's wager makes it sound like belief is a switch that you can just flip.
Wrong.
But belief doesn't work that way. You can't just decide to believe Australia doesn't exist for $1 million. Butler gets it. He's not asking you to force belief. He's asking you to carefully investigate. Inquiry is voluntary, rational, and evidence-driven. If Christianity isn't true, you won't believe it. But if the evidence convinces you, belief flows naturally. Third, there's the irrationality objection. Isn't believing for a reward just kind of selfish? Critics of Pascal's wager argue that belief should be based on evidence, not self-interest. Butler's wager aligns perfectly with evidentialism. It's not about believing for the reward. It's about carefully weighing up the evidence and following it where it leads.
This is where the argument really starts to unravel. Let's take these fixes one by one. First, there is the many gods objection. He claims that Butler fixes this by telling you to start with Christianity because it has unique, strong evidence. This isn't a fix. It's a promissory note. It's special pleading. It doesn't solve the problem. It just asserts that it has a solution and promises to show us later. The many gods problem remains firmly in place until and unless the evidence for Christianity is demonstrated to be qualitatively superior to all other religions. We'll see if he delivers on that promise. Second, he discusses the impossibility objection. He says it's about investigation, not forced belief. I'll grant that investigating is a voluntary act. That part is an improvement. But as I said before, the investigation is tainted by the high-stakes threat. A careful investigation, where one outcome leads to eternal bliss and the other to serious consequences, is an investigation under duress. And third, he discusses the irrationality objection. This is the most glaring contradiction. He claims it's not about believing for the reward, but about weighing evidence. But the entire wager is framed by the potential reward or punishment. He literally says the reason to take the wager is that the consequences of rejecting it are more serious. He can't have it both ways. He can't say, ignore the reward, while simultaneously using the reward as the primary reason to enter into the investigation in the first place. This doesn't align with evidentialism. It subordinates evidentialism to risk management. So none of these fixes really work. They just repackage the original problems, but it all hinges on that promissory note, the supposedly unique, strong evidence for Christianity. Let's see what he's got.
So why investigate Christianity and not, say, Islam or Buddhism? Fair question, but Christianity makes bold historical claims, none bigger than the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection wasn't a whispered legend. It was publicly proclaimed right after Jesus' death in Jerusalem, the very place it happened. The apostles didn't just preach it, they preached it under hostile scrutiny, risking torture and execution. People don't willingly suffer and die for something they know is a lie. Now, compare that to Islam. The Quran denies Muhammad performed miracles. Say, for example, Surah 2950, which says, I am only a clear warner. And the miracle stories in the Hadiths come much later, with zero risk for promoting them. Krishna, his miracles like lifting a mountain were written centuries later, blending legend with theology. Buddha, stories of him taming elephants or walking at birth emerged hundreds of years after his life. Zoroaster, his miracles were recorded millennia later with no hostile witnesses or historical evidence. Christianity's claims are public, early, and bold.
Okay, this is the evidential core of his argument, and it is built on a series of classic apologetic talking points that are, quite frankly, incredibly weak. First is the central claim. People don't willingly suffer and die for something that they know is a lie. This is a masterclass in missing the point. Of course they don't. People willingly suffer and die for what they sincerely believe is the truth. The question is not whether the apostles were sincere. The question is whether they were correct. The Heaven's Gate cult members died for what they believed. The 9/11 terrorists died for what they believed. Martyrs from countless other religions have died for what they believed. Sincerity is not and has never been a reliable pathway to truth. This argument proves nothing about the reality of the resurrection, only about the conviction of the early followers. Second, he claims the resurrection was publicly proclaimed right after Jesus' death in Jerusalem. Our sources for this are the Gospels and Acts. The Gospels were written 40 to 70 years after the events by anonymous authors in a different language, in different countries. They are theological documents, not objective historical reports. Our earliest source is Paul, who wrote about 20 years after the fact. But Paul explicitly says in Galatians that he received his gospel not from any human source, but through a personal revelation, a vision. That is the very opposite of public, verifiable historical evidence. Third, and most importantly, is the incredible double standard he applies. He dismisses miracle claims in Islam because the Hadith were written much later. But our Gospels were also written decades later. He dismisses Krishna's miracles as legend with theology. I can't think of a better three-word description for the genre of the canonical Gospels. He dismisses Buddha's miracles as emerging hundreds of years after his life. Fine. But this doesn't disprove Buddhism, it just critiques some of its later hagiography. He's applying a ruthless historical standard to every other religion while giving Christianity a complete pass on the very same criteria. This is not the careful, open-minded investigation that he promised. This is special pleading.
So, if you're going to investigate one religion, it makes more sense to start here. So, here's how Butler's wager plays out. If Christianity is false, you lose a bit of time, but you gain a stronger, more informed understanding of one of history's most influential religions. You become a credible critic, not just another Reddit atheist recycling bad arguments. And let's be real, even people with YouTube channels or even PhDs behind their name are guilty of being uninformed critics. Now, if Christianity is true, you gain truth, purpose, and eternal life. That's a really big deal. The stakes are high, but the cost of entry is small. Are you willing to give Christianity a fair shot? You'll know that you've taken Butler's wager when you can present the strongest case for Christianity and explain why you still reject it. Now, I've been following the whole apologetics, counter-apologetics movement for over a decade, and I've yet to see this done. Personally, I would love to see skeptics take me up on this challenge. And I can guarantee you that the people that will be most offended at this video are the people who could stand to take the challenge the most.
And we end with the payoff and the challenge, wrapped in a layer of steep condescension. Let's start with the idea that by investigating and rejecting Christianity, you become a credible critic and not just another Reddit atheist. This framing is insulting. It presumes that the vast majority of skeptics are uninformed. This is demonstrably false. Yes, there are uninformed atheists, just like there are uninformed Christians. A huge number of us atheists are former believers. We grew up in the church. We went to seminary. We read the Apologetics. We know the arguments. We know the strongest case. We investigated our way out of belief. He says that he's yet to see a skeptic who can present the strongest case for Christianity and still reject it. He even puts a little drawing of Bart Ehrman on the screen. Bart Ehrman is a world-renowned New Testament scholar, a former evangelical Christian who can articulate the case for Christianity better than almost anyone, and who also rejects it based on the evidence. The idea that no such person exists, including Bart Ehrman, is absurd. And again, it's dismissive and insulting. It's a rhetorical trick to make it seem like anyone who rejects the faith just must be ignorant. Finally, we get that last smug line. The people that will be most offended at this video are the people who could stand to take the challenge the most. This is a classic psychological ploy called poisoning the well. It's an attempt to inoculate his argument against any criticism before it's even been made. If you disagree, you're not being rational. You're just offended and fragile because you know he's right. Well, I'm not offended. I'm just not at all convinced. And the reason is simple. Butler's wager fails for the same reasons that Pascal's does. It's still fundamentally an argument from fear. Its proposed solution to the many gods problem relies on a biased and hypocritical evaluation of evidence. And its final challenge is based on the false and condescending premise that skeptics are simply uninformed. The real challenge isn't for atheists to investigate Christianity. Many of us have. The challenge is for apologists to engage with our reasons for leaving, to acknowledge the weakness in their own historical sources, and to stop pretending that sincerity is a substitute for evidence. They're starting up the lawnmowers, so I'm going to wrap this sucker up. Thank you for joining me here on another episode of Cynical Sermons. I've enjoyed having you with me. I hope that you've learned something. I know that I have. If I've said anything that's incorrect in any way, Yahweh, Jebus, Holy Spirit, you all have the chance to chime in right now. Or Vishnu, or Allah. Anyone? Well, there you have it. I guess it's all good. Thank you for being here. Please like, please subscribe. And until I see you again, lo, I say unto you, stay skeptical.